Welcome everybody. In our last video, we discussed the basic music alphabet. We talked about the notes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and how it repeats ad infinitum. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And it just does this on and on and on forever. And then we went ahead and we talked a little bit about the importance of a very special relationship called an octave. And that would basically look like this. If I took an A and went to a different A, whether it was a higher A or a lower A, I would call it an octave. And if I look at B to B, that would also be an octave. And it doesn't matter if I'm going from low A to high A or conversely from high A to low A, because distance is distance, right? B, low B to high B, or high B to low B. And we can look at why do we call it an octave, because if I label these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and it's 8 notes, and that's why we call it an octave. Well, today I would like to move on a little bit from that topic and actually discuss what is the chromatic scale. So let's go ahead and start with that. The chromatic scale. The chromatic scale is certainly one of the most important things that you could ever learn in music, and I actually think that you need to learn it and memorize it very well. Most of my students really have a hard time with that, but if you really work on it well, you can get it down just fine. So let's go ahead and write out what it is. So we're going to have A, then we'll have A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, and then once again, like our basic music notes, we're going to start again at A, and this will go on forever. So let's look at a couple things that I think are very interesting. Number one, when we talk about the chromatic scale, let's go ahead and look at this from B to C. B to C. What we notice here is, oh, there's no sharp. And if I looked over here from E to F, there is also no sharp. So we want to say at this point, we want to say that B sharp and E sharp do not exist. Do not exist. Okay, so that's the first thing you really want to get your head wrapped around. Now, it turns out that they do, theoretically, but we don't want to consider that just yet if you're an absolute beginner. Let's kind of back up a little bit and talk about what the chromatic scale is. The chromatic scale is the basic alphabet for musicians. So we're just going to call this our musical alphabet. The chromatic scale is our musical alphabet. All right, and so this is essentially all the notes that we're going to be working with. Let's kind of make some other observations. How many notes do we see? So I'll go and once again, I'll label them out here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And so we actually have a total of 12 notes in the chromatic scale. And this is the chromatic scale using sharps. And so let's talk about what a sharp is as well. So we have this symbol called a sharp. This symbol right there, which is probably drawn a little bit more correctly than, let's say, that is a little bit incorrect, and this is more correct. You can see that my sharp here is tilted on its side, and it really looks like a tilted hashtag or possibly a tilted tic-tac-toe sign. So this symbol is called a sharp. And let's kind of discuss what the function of a sharp is. We have all kinds of sharps. We have A sharp, we have C sharp, D sharp, F sharp, and G sharp. So we have all kinds of different sharps in here, but we want to understand what the function is. Before we can really understand the function, I think what we need to do is actually take a step back and understand what the distances are in music. And so we're going to rewrite the chromatic scale here just so we have a little bit of room. And so A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, and then finally back to A. Okay, all right, so now if we look at this particular distance, let's do this in, how about green? And we look at this particular distance from A to A sharp, we are going to call that distance a half step. And let's look at the distance from A sharp to B. We're going to call that also a half step. B to C is also a half step. C to C sharp is also a half step. C sharp to D is also a half step. And this goes on forever. So the chromatic scale is built up entirely of half steps. Half steps. So half steps. Now, if we were to go, well, what if we skipped over a note? For example, what if I wanted to go from A to B? Do I have a name for that? And I do. I'm going to call that a whole step. And some people will refer to this as a full step. I think the more appropriate terminology would definitely be whole step. So A to B would be a whole step. B to C sharp, I apologize, B to C sharp would be a whole step. C sharp to D sharp would be a whole step. D sharp to F would be a whole step. F to G would be a whole step. And then G back to A would be a whole step. So those are all considered whole steps. Now, could I do something larger than a whole step? And the answer is absolutely yes, I could. You could do something like, you could do, what if you wanted to go ahead and do something like A to C, and that would give you a step and a half. And then after that, you just kind of label them, step and a half, then two and a half, then three and a half steps. For our particular purposes, a half step and a whole step is just fine. So we understand now that this distance from here to here, from A to A sharp, is a half step. That's what we call that. So what does a sharp do? Well, a sharp raises a note by a half step. So let's write the definition here. Raises a note by a half step. So in other words, it makes the note go higher by a half step. And you can actually see this. You can go, oh, well, when A to A sharp, A goes up to A sharp, C goes up to C sharp, D goes up to D sharp, F goes up to F sharp, G goes up to G sharp. And that is what the function of sharps are. So that is your chromatic scale in sharps.